I'm sure you're already aware of the importance of paraphrasing when you're describing the work of other authors. But you might be a bit confused about what exactly constitutes acceptable practice when it comes to paraphrasing. So in this video I'm going to provide some simple advice that will allow you to ensure that you always paraphrase the work of other authors adequately. As noted by Park in 2003, issues with plagiarism within higher education tend to come less from uncertainty about the definition of plagiarism and more from ambiguity about the application of that definition in different academic contexts. One principal source of ambiguity about the application of plagiarism is exactly what constitutes acceptable practice when it comes to paraphrasing. Indeed, research has indicated that students are often not particularly confident in their ability to paraphrase adequately. A key concern with respect to good paraphrasing practice is avoiding lazy paraphrasing, sometimes referred to as patch writing. Lazy paraphrasing occurs when an author takes the work of another author, modifies it very lightly by, for example, adding, subtracting or substituting a few key words, and then presents that text as if it were their own work. Students can often struggle to distinguish between acceptable and unacceptable or lazy paraphrasing. Sometimes they mistakenly believe that it's okay to make minor changes to the composition of another author and then present that text as if it were their own work, as long as they've included a citation. So let's have a look at an example of lazy paraphrasing, followed by an example of acceptable paraphrasing.
So there are currently two short passages of text that appear on screen. The passage on the left-hand side of the screen is the original composition, and the passage on the right-hand side of the screen is a lazily paraphrased version of that composition, with the bits that have been changed highlighted in yellow font. You might want to pause the video at this point so you have time to read both passages of text, and press play when you're ready to continue. So if you compare these two passages of text side by side, it's quickly apparent that the person who wrote the lazy paraphrased version of the text has made only very minor and superficial changes to the text. In fact, all they've really done is use a thesaurus to change a selection of words from the original composition. They may have felt that because they'd cited the author of the original text, this gave them the entitlement to make such minor changes to that text and then present it as if it were their own work. But that's not the case. What they've done is a clear example of lazy paraphrasing and would be regarded as plagiarism. So let's have a look at an acceptable example of paraphrasing. On the screen at the moment there are two short passages of text. On the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see the same original passage of text that was used in the previous example. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see an acceptably paraphrased version of that text. You might want to pause the video at this point to give yourself a chance to read the text that appears on screen, and press play when you're ready to continue. If you compare these two passages of text side by side, it quickly becomes apparent that the author of the acceptably paraphrased version of the text has written about the original author's work using their own words. And they've also acknowledged the fact that they are writing about another author's work and effectively making the same point as him here by citing that author. And you can see that citation at the end of the passage of text on the right-hand side.
Having learned about lazy paraphrasing, a question students sometimes ask is, well, just how different does my text have to be from the original source to be considered acceptable paraphrasing? In my experience, this often reflects a suboptimal approach to writing, in which the student starts off with the work of another author as the basis of their composition and then attempts to modify it to make it different. Of course, this practice isn't really composition as much as, well, editing the work of another author, and as such it's very conducive to lazy paraphrasing. If you use the text of another author as the basis of your own composition, then there'll probably be very little incentive for you to make extensive changes to that text, because you'd probably figure that by doing so, you'd only undermine the academic quality of that text. The best advice when it comes to avoiding lazy paraphrasing is to always write from scratch. Don't use the work of another author as the basis of your composition. Even if you're completely convinced that you won't be able to articulate things nearly as well as that author, your tutors don't expect you to be as eloquent and as articulate and as skilled at writing as the authors of the sources you are reading. You should also know that study practices that are suboptimal when it comes to learning can also really undermine your writing and promote lazy paraphrasing. A good example here is always having your sources within your sight when you're studying. Because what will tend to happen in this instance is that you will start to lean too heavily on those sources in your composition, interspersing your own words with sections of text from those sources, rather than using your own words throughout the entirety of your composition. It's very easy to do this inadvertently, or at least with no ill intent. To avoid this happening, try applying the 3R approach to your composition. Read a section of text, then put that source material out of sight. Then try writing down what you can recall from the piece of reading that you've done. Check what you've written down for factual accuracy against the source, and then once you've got your facts straight, any further amendments to your text should be done with the source out of sight. If you follow the writing advice that I've just outlined, then you shouldn't have any issues with lazy paraphrasing. But if you are concerned about whether you've adequately paraphrased a source, here's a simple litmus test that you can apply.
A useful way of determining whether a passage of text has been adequately paraphrased is to begin by highlighting any overlap between the paraphrased text and the original text. If you have originality checking software such as Turnitin, this process will be done for you, but it's possible to do it manually as well. Once you've highlighted any overlap between the paraphrased version of the text and the original version, what you should do is read the paraphrased version out, but omit anything that's highlighted as having overlap with the original text. So let's do that with the example of text that appears on the right-hand side of the screen. Penn, 2022, argued that information, not alone, students, research, them, the issue with rereading is that. Once you've read out the paraphrased version, with any overlap between it and the original version omitted, you need to ask yourself whether the text that remains still makes any kind of sense or substantive point. If the answer to that question is no, then your text clearly hasn't been adequately paraphrased, as it does not stand independently from the original source material. If the answer is yes, what remains still generally makes sense and is making some kind of substantive point, then you can be confident that the work has been adequately paraphrased, because it stands independently of the original composition when the overlap with the original composition is removed from the paraphrased version. I think you'd have to agree with me that using the method that we've just identified, the text on the right-hand side of the screen would most certainly be regarded as an example of lazy paraphrasing, i.e. not acceptable paraphrasing practice. And that's because once we removed any overlap between it and the original source of text, what remained no longer made sense or made any kind of substantive point.
Please be aware that no amount of paraphrasing negates the need to acknowledge the work of another author. If you're writing about the work of another author, albeit entirely in your own words, then you still need to cite that author's work. If you're confused about the difference between citation, quotation and referencing, then I'll put a link to a video up in the top right hand corner of the screen that you should find very helpful. I hope you found this video useful. If so, please do hit the like button. If you haven't already, why not subscribe to my channel for more videos on how psychology can help you study more effectively. If you want to know when I post new content, turn on the bell notification. Thanks very much.